Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you here in my study at Sunnyside. And I look forward to entertaining your questions. I'll begin by talking a little bit about my life and work, but I anticipate that you will have some inquisitive questions for me. Now, in 1802, when I was 19 years old, I introduced my first appearance in print as the Superfluous Observations of an Odd Old Fellow. These were the letters of Jonathan Old-Style Gentleman. Of course, then, I was only pretending to be old and odd. I was only 19 years old. And now, over 50 years later, I find myself rather more genuinely old and odd, and yet still offering superfluous observations. You see, I have always enjoyed visiting new scenes and observing strange characters and manners. And it was always either my good or evil lot to have my roving passions gratified. As it is now the fashion for tourists to travel with a pen in hand and to bring home portfolios filled with sketches, I find myself also inclined to jot down notes and memorandums in my ever-present journals. Well, I see when I was in Oklahoma Territory in 1832, I noted in my sketchbook that all around was a vast tract of uninhabited country, where there was neither to be seen the log house of a white man nor the wigwam of an Indian, but only great grassy wastes, interspersed with forests and groves and clumps of trees, and watered by the Arkansas. And over these fertile and verdant areas roamed the elk, the buffalo, and the wild horse in all their native freedom. I suspect that now, over 25 years later, that landscape has altered. But you see, I have always been haunted by the effects of time on people and places and even countries. Born as I was in 1783, the year that the Treaty of Paris formally concluded our American War for Independence, I have grown up with these United States, observing and participating in many of the changes of our country, including the creation of a native literature on the traditions of Old World. I began writing merely on a whim. My older brother William, no, it was Peter, published those letters of Jonathan Old-Style Gentleman in his newspaper, the Morning Chronicle. And then my eldest brother William, I'm the youngest of 8 brothers and sisters, William and I and his brother-in-law published Salmagundi, or the Whim, Whams, and Opinions of Lancelot Langstaff, Esquire, and Others. We were laughing philosophers, clearly of the opinion that wisdom, true wisdom, is a plump, jolly dame who sits in her armchair and laughs right merrily at the farce of life and takes the world as it goes. I was, less than half educated. My schooling was spotty and undisciplined. Although at our home in New York, my elder brothers and I had ample leisure for speech making and music and drawing and painting and writing, a hopeful beau of my elder sister Catherine, by the name of John Anderson, was very adept with pen and brush, and he bestowed upon our family many of his paintings and drawings, and he even deigned to give me a sketchbook of my own. And to this day, I enjoyed dallying with writing and painting, but I learned early on that my talent lay in sketching with words rather than with painting. My father dubbed me the philosopher for my dreamy and abstracted habits. I was always dreaming and reading of travel. For me, a book of travel was like a coach at the door. I must jump in and take a ride. And so, through reading, my mind was early filled with associations of manners and customs of Europe. As I grew older, I extended the range of my observations. I spent my boyhood holidays in rambles about the countryside along the Hudson River, and I made myself familiar with every place famous in history and fable. I knew every place where a murder or a robbery was committed or a ghost seen. And I visited the neighboring villages, long settled by Dutch people, and I observed their manners and customs, and extended greatly the stock of my knowledge by conversing with their sages and their wise men. And so in this way I gathered material that later bore fruit in stories like the legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle. As I was very quick, I was intended for the law, but I was a very heedless student, I must confess, although I did pass the bar. But I was deeply attracted to belles lettres, and I had secretly undertaken a comical history of New York in the persona of an old Dutch pedant, Diedrich Knickerbocker. Well, when this comic piece was published in 1809, I found it sold very well, and to my surprise, I became a celebrity. Everywhere I went, I was overwhelmed with attentions. I went down to Washington in 1811, and I walked in uninvited to the White House to one of Dolly Madison's balls, and within 10 minutes, I was hand in glove with half the people assembled. Oh, Dolly Madison, she is a fine, buxom dame with a laugh and a kind word for everyone. But as to her husband, the president, Jimmy Madison, oh, poor Jimmy, he is but a withered little Applejawn. Oh, I enjoyed myself greatly for a time, and then my brothers, who were all indulgent to me, decided to make me a silent partner in their business, an import business in England. Now, they made me a partner on the condition that I should never take an active part in the business, but only devote myself to literature. But shortly after I arrived in England in 1815, I saw the specter of bankruptcy looming on the horizon, and I knew that it was unavoidable. So I endeavored to take my pen in hand and through my writing raise us from the degradation of bankruptcy to which we had fallen. Now, I decided that I would not attempt a lofty theme nor try to compete with the sages and wise writers of my day. No, I preferred addressing myself to the feeling and the fancy of the reader rather than to his judgment. And so works such as The Legend of Sleepy Hollow may be considered trifling in their genre, but as long as they are assessed in the class of literature to which they belong, that is all that I ask. I only aspire to blow a flute accompaniment in the national concert, and I leave it to others to play the fiddle or blow the French horn. Well, to my amazement, the sketchbook was incredibly successful. Now, I would willingly attribute its success to its intrinsic merits, but they were due, the success was due, I'm afraid, to a less flattering cause. You see, it was considered a matter of marvel that a man from the wilds of America should express himself in tolerable English. I was looked upon as something new and amazing in literature, a kind of demi-savage with a feather in his hand instead of on his head. And there was a great curiosity to know what such a being would have to say about civilized society. Well, I found myself launched upon the literary circles in London. I had met Sir Walter Scott, and he became a very dear friend to me, a great-hearted, generous-spirited being. If you knew him, you would love him. It was he who had encouraged me to explore German literature and folklore that bore fruit in the sketchbook. So I found myself launched upon Europe. I traveled through France and Paris, through Germany, Dresden, and eventually I found myself in Spain, where I was given access to great libraries of Spanish archives, where I was able to study the voyages of Columbus and write several successful books about the voyages, before I eventually found my way to Granada, to the Alhambra. That is a palace of dream and legend to any traveler imbued with a love for the historical and the poetical. That royal abode of the Moorish kings, where they made their last stand for empire in Spain, is unforgettable. Well, from there, I found my way to London, and I worked in the diplomatic corps for a time. But eventually, I found my way back to America in 1832 and decided that it was time that I took my sketchbook not to Germany or Spain, but to the American West. And there I undertook a tour on the prairies in the company of Henry Leavitt Ellsworth, a newly appointed commissioner for Indian Affairs. And the result of our travels together in the fall of 1832 was my book, A Tour on the Prairies. And from then, I was able to buy Sunnyside, and now I am using this study here to write my, my long biography of George Washington, my namesake. It's now growing to 5 volumes. Well, with that brief overview of my life and writings, I think I would like to invite you to ask me any questions that you might have.
Hello, Mr. Irving. This is Mary.
Mary, how do you do?
You called Jimmy Madison an Applejohn, and I've never heard that term before. What is an Applejohn?
An Applejohn is a withered little apple. And so Jimmy was not a very impressive physical specimen, is the point of that analogy.
My name is Barbara, and I wondered of all the characters you've written, if you have a particular favorite.
Well, let me see. I guess I have a particular fondness for Rip Van Winkle. His ability to enjoy life, even if it meant being frivolous and putting up with his termagant wife, Dame Van Winkle. I appreciate his ability to enjoy his forays out into the Catskills. He's a dreamer like myself.
Okay, Mr. Irving, this is Pete. Her name is Pete Fernandez.
I'm named Pete, but I'm not a boy. I would like to talk with you about your stay at the Alhambra, this mysterious place where you lived for several years and you did a lot of your writing. And tell me what you felt when you were there and your feelings at that place, please.
It was an amazing experience to be able to live in that deserted ruin of a sumptuous palace. I did have a few servants who tended to my needs, but it was a great luxury to wander through those palace courtyards and to listen to the splash of the fountains, and then at night to be in one of the royal bedrooms off away by myself, although I must admit the first night I spent there, I was hearing noises that drew me to the door, but I felt I needed to lock it and stay put for the night. It was a haunting place in many ways, a palace of amazing beauty. And I became very enamored of the stories of the Moors, such as Boabdil, the last Moorish ruler, who heaved the Moor's last sigh as he looked back at the Alhambra from the mountain pass when he finally left it, having been defeated by Queen Isabella. The Alhambra is unfortunately in ruins in many respects, but that also adds to its mystique and the atmosphere of it.
Hello, Mr. Irving. This is Kathy from Irving, Texas. And I also enjoy your character, Rip Van Winkle. And I'm very impressed with the way you created your character. So my question for you is one of imagination. If you were to write another chapter in his life and have him awaken in the 20th century, what do you imagine he would encounter?
So, to bring him into the 20th century is what you're asking me. Oh, well, that is a challenge indeed. Now, Rip Van Winkle slept for 20 years, and when he woke up, there had been tremendous changes in America. Instead of King George being the ruler, we now had George Washington as our president. So I would imagine a sequel to Rip Van Winkle would place him in a very different world indeed. I mean, even in my lifetime, we've seen travel by boat replaced by travel by rail. In fact, the railroad comes very close to my piazza here at Sunnyside. And so I anticipate that maybe there would be even more marvels of transportation for Rip to experience if he slept for several hundred years at this point, or at least 100. So that's what I would anticipate. The pace of life would become very much faster when he woke up the next time.
I would like to hear about your fiancée and her passing and how it affected the rest of your life.
I see. Yes, a very sad episode in my past. When I was studying law, I was studying with Judge Josiah Hoffman. I was a very distinguished political and legal figure, and his daughter Matilda was an adorable creature of 15, and we were engaged when she developed consumption, and the progress of her malady was rapid indeed, and it hurried her off within weeks. I was with her when she died, the last person she looked upon. After Matilda's death, a cloud came over my disposition that darkened it for a long time. When I was successful with Diedrich Knickerbocker's History of New York within the year, it gave me a new energy in my life. But I have remembered Matilda all these years. Thank you for asking.
I'm Richard, and I'm asking about Ichabod Crane. Was there a particular reason or person that you made so famous? Ichabod Crane, what was your inspiration?
Well, Ichabod is the quintessential Connecticut Yankee, if you will. He was an interloper in Sleepy Hollow, and I think that characterized him a great deal. The Yankee who was talented with music, but rather greedy, and I suspect that his interest in Katrina Van Tassel was as much in her father's largesse as it was in Katrina herself. So he is an exemplar of a certain type in American culture, the Connecticut Yankee.
Another question is to tell us about your appointment to Spain. Could you tell us how that came about?
My appointment to Minister of Spain. Now, I had come back to this country in 1832, and I was happy at Sunnyside, but in 1842 I was appointed Minister to Spain, and the way that happened is rather circuitous. Now, before I left Europe, I had been the secretary to the legation in London, serving first under Louis Maclean, and then he was succeeded as ambassador by Martin Van Buren. And when Martin Van Buren arrived, I was at his service, but he soon received notice that he had not been confirmed by Congress and would have to return. He was not sure how to respond under those circumstances, so I advised him to go ahead and visit the court of St. James as if nothing was wrong, and that he would end up becoming, I believed, the next president, which did indeed come to pass. Congress refusing to confirm him had the opposite effect of what they had intended, I think. Instead of stopping his career, it launched it. So he was President Andrew Jackson's vice president and then succeeded him as president. And while he was president, I requested that he give my brother Ebenezer, who lived with me at Sunnyside, lives here now, with 4 of his daughters. I asked that President Van Buren give Ebenezer an appointment because we needed money, to be frank. And Martin Van Buren, my old friend, whom I had served so well, didn't respond. So I threw my support in the next election, not to Martin Van Buren's second term, but instead to his rival, William Henry Harrison. And Mr. Harrison was indeed elected president, served regrettably only 1 month, died from a cold he caught at the inauguration. And his vice president, President Tyler, succeeded him and appointed me in return for the support I gave Harrison and Tyler's ticket. He gave me the ambassadorship to Spain. So that's how that came about. I was there from 1842 to 1846 before I was able to return to Sunnyside and my family here.
Can you tell us, do you speak any other languages?
Yes, I'm fluent in Spanish, and I've translated a great deal of Spanish documents. Here around me in the library are many of the Spanish books that I acquired in Spain. I had hoped to write a major history of the conquest of Mexico and had launched upon that here at this very desk, only to learn that young Mr. Prescott was also writing on that subject. And so I stepped away from it and allowed Prescott to write that. I hope he realized what a great sacrifice that was. That would have been my next great book, I think. So I'm fluent in Spanish. I also am fairly fluent in French and less so in German, but those are my 3 languages in addition to English.
Are there any other public figures that you perhaps admire or are associated with that we might recognize?
Well, when I was young, my family were advocates of Aaron Burr's political career. My brother Peter's newspaper, the Morning Chronicle, where the Letters of Jonathan Oldstyle was published, was a Burrite newspaper. We supported him in his unsuccessful bid as governor, as mayor of New York City. And then when he was tried for treason after assassinating Alexander Hamilton, he tried to set himself up as the Emperor of Mexico or King of Mexico. And President Jefferson, who had been president when Aaron Burr was vice president, then tried him for treason in Richmond, Virginia. I went down to Richmond supposedly to write about Burr's case, and I was able to visit him in his jail cell, but I ended up not writing anything, and he was acquitted, I'm pleased to say. So Aaron Burr is a prominent figure that our family has had connections with. And certainly I've known many presidents, and I would say I was probably closest to Martin Van Buren, and unfortunately that relationship has cooled. I also have met President Pierce, and I have had acquaintances with a number of my contemporary writers, James Fenimore Cooper, and I'm sorry to say that he seems to resent my success. I only wish him the best. I've been the recipient of letters from Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne, young up-and-coming writers whose work I admire, but don't frankly understand the darkness of them, I must admit. I also met the writer Mary Shelley as a widow in Paris. I was introduced to her through John Howard Payne, our mutual friend, an actor I'd known in New York, and then later someone I collaborated with on plays, although I kept my name private, but I worked with him on them. Well, he was quite taken with young Mary Shelley and introduced us at the opera in Paris one evening, and then revealed to me subsequently that Mrs. Shelley was interested in myself and not him. I was quite flattered, but unable to reciprocate her affections.
Mr. Irving, when Charles Dickens toured the United States, did you meet him or did you hear him lecture?
Oh, yes. In 1842, young Mr. Dickens came to New York, and he was very generous to me. We had a great banquet to celebrate his arrival in New York. This was just before I left for Spain to become the ambassador. And Mr. Dickens said that I was a great influence on him, that 2 out of every 7 nights he would read the sketchbook until his copy had fallen into pieces. I have to admit I was very touched by that, but when I visited Mr. Dickens in his hotel, I was quite taken aback at his vulgarity. He was not a gentleman, I'm sorry to say, but I do appreciate his homage to me. Now, we may not have time for much more questions at this point. I think we're out of time. So I want to thank you again for your graciousness in joining me here at Sunnyside, and I hope to visit with you again someday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.